Running commentary. We are exploring listening to albums. It is a lost art form. We took an hour out of our day. We switched off the phones. We switched off the computers. We did not answer the door. We sat down and we listened to the artist's vision and concept. The Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers. Released on the 23rd of April, 1971, Sticky Fingers is the 9th British and 11th American studio album by the Rolling Stones. There were a few days of recording in December 1969 at the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in Alabama. There are an abundance of dates in 1970 for recording at the Olympic Studios, Trident Studios, with the exception of Sister Morphine, which was recorded between the 22nd and 31st of March 1969. These guys were busy, so I guess they were squeezing in the studio, where they could. The producer for the record was Jimmy Miller, and this was the first album on the Rolling Stones label. The band had been putting out records on Decca until that point in the UK, London Records in the US. A number one album in the UK and the US, as well as Australia, West Germany as was, Holland, Norway and Sweden. Let's not forget Spain, where the cover of the album was fingers packaged in treacle. Elsewhere, the album cover was a belted jean-wearing, I'm guessing, Mick Jagger below-the-waist shot. Brian Jones was noticeable by his absence on this record. He'd been one of the founding members of the Rolling Stones, but his role had steadily diminished throughout the 60s as Mick Jagger and Keith Richards' successful songwriting partnership resulted in the Rolling Stones being a supergroup. Sad to relate, Brian developed a serious drug problem and was asked to leave the band in June 1969. Mick Taylor, who is featured throughout Sticky Fingers, became the Stones' guitarist. Brian Jones, within a month, was found dead at the bottom of his swimming pool. That death, and whether it was a murder, is a whole other story. There's a movie about it called Stoned. The Rolling Stones were formed in 1962. As we've said, Brian Jones, Mick Jagger, lead vocals, Keith Richards, lead guitar, BVs, Bill Wyman on bass, Charlie Watts on drums, and Ian Stewart on piano, who was not part of the official lineup in 1963, but toured with the band until his death in 1985. Jagger, Richards, Jones, Stewart, and Dick Taylor had played a gig at the Marquee on Oxford Street as the Rolling Stones on the 12th of July 1962. Bill Wyman came aboard in December 1962 and Charlie Watts joined in January 1963. The Beatles had directed Andrew Loog Oldham towards the Stones after he'd done a stint as their publicist. The Stones signed Oldham on as a manager. He was very young at the time, and his mother also had to sign any contracts that his name was on. Brown Sugar is cut from the same cloth lyrically as Honky Tonk Women. It's up-tempo and sexy. It's definitely a byproduct of the hippies and the protests of the late 60s. The tasting of forbidden fruit. A number one hit in the US and Canada, a number two hit in UK and Ireland. Marsha Hunt, who played Dion in Hair, is widely understood to be the inspiration of Brown Sugar. Mick has a child with her by the name of Karis. Recorded in Muscle Shoals Studios, Alabama, chronologically this was the follow-up single to Honky Tonk. The almost 2-year gap can be explained to legal wranglings. Brown Sugar is a relevant rock classic. Case closed. Sway is sandwiched between two classic songs. I like the strings and piano. Aladdin Sane seems like it might have referenced this subconsciously. Keith Richards plays the guitar like he means it. It makes you want to drink a nice single malt scotch. It's also the B-side to Wild Horses. While this track peaked, this is Wild Horses we're talking about now, while this track peaked at number 11 in Canada and number 28 in the USA, I think it's fair to say that it's songs like this which make people refer to this as the Stones' golden period. Jerry Hall, Mick's ex-wife, calls this her favorite Stones song. There's a technique on this track called Nashville tuning, which Mick Taylor uses, where the E, A, D, and G strings are strung an octave higher than in regular tuning. This is what gives this song its brittleness, together with Jagger's raw and exposed vocal. Keith Richards is known to have said that this song is about the usual emotional trial of not wanting to be on the road. I believe this song stands out as an anthem of devotion to something. What could Wild Horses not drag you away from? Let me ask, did the Beatles ever record anything like this? I know a great deal about music, but these album reviews show me that I actually know very little. But I'll say this, these songs catch me. I haven't got to go and do a dissertation on dystopian literature to get what's going on here. I can relate to this song as something that is relatable, is relatable to the world that I live in. If that makes me a dickhead, as one of our YouTube commentators said I was, so be it. Wild Horses is an excellent song. Let's talk. I just want to take a little break from the music here and just talk about this story, which I thought was so pertinent to this review, and I think you'll get a kick out of it. Was apparently that Jagger, in his absolute heyday in the 70s, is living on the Upper West Side or something. You know, one of these apartments very close to Central Park, and he's living in this building, and he'd come down and collect his mail in the foyer of his building, and there was a super like these buildings have, and he had a son, and Jagger was always very friendly with him, but the son was like super not impressed with whoever he was and really didn't know who he was. And apparently Jagger at some point came down with a signed copy of every Rolling Stones album and gave them to this kid. And the story goes that the kid was later seen playing frisbee with these in Central Park with his buddies, and you just wonder how many thousands of dollars those might be worth now. But I just thought that story was just absolutely brilliant. I had to tell that story, and I think you can really appreciate why. Can't You Hear Me Knocking? I love Charlie Watts' drums. The guitar riffs are great. Jagger's a legend on this track. The band really understand who and what they are to their audience. It's a great groove. Their blues influence is here. There's a great sax solo which Bobby Keys absolutely nails. Rocky Dijon is on congas. Billy Preston is on the keyboards. Pink Floyd has pulled from this. The instrumental is pure and magical escapism. I am having a grand old time with this album. You Gotta Move. Straight up blues. It's a blues song. Reminds me of a spiritual. The harmonies are genius. It's performed with confidence and conviction. This is one of my favorites on the album, and I like a lot of songs on here. Really good. Bitch is the B-side to Brown Sugar. I salivate like a Pavlov dog. It was great. Just when I'm reviewing the album, I incidentally happened to be watching the Boyhood movie, which when Patricia Arquette's character gets together with that school teacher, and he mentions the Pavlov dog and the Rolling Stones in that classroom scene, so I found that like an interesting connection. It's good rhythmically, nice brass section, it fits on the album just great. I Got the Blues is the next track. Huge Otis Redding sensibility here. Billy Preston plays Hammond organ, it's great. Completely believable. I need to go and buy it right now. I did go and buy it. I bought like 5 tracks of this album. I thought it was fantastic. Really good album. Sister Morphine. Sticky Fingers doesn't skimp on drug references, nor should it. I could be wrong, but I always think of the Stones as one of the main bands that characterized musically the Vietnam War. Maybe I watched one too many episodes of Tour of Duty, but heroin addiction was a real social issue of the war. And I think that's why the song's here. Dead Flowers, absolute classic. Rose Pink Cadillac and Kentucky Derby Days. Funny. You know, I won't forget to put roses on your grave if send me dead flowers. And they went all country at They went all out country here. There's rock and roll lyrics, the heroin reference again, and, you know, I'll be down in the basement with a needle and a spoon. It works. Say It with Dead Flowers. Genius. Great song. Moonlight Mile. Atmospheric, in keeping with the album's direction. I'd love to hear this around a campfire. Quietly reflecting on the flames. Elton John's Madman Across the Water pulls from here. This is what you see about this album. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter whether they realize they're doing it or not. People are listening to the Rolling Stones and they're getting influenced by it and they're taking it to their own work. And you know, there will be some out there who will say, how can you call yourself a music critic if you haven't heard Sticky Fingers? I maintain that as a younger person, I was intently focused on singles. What listening to this classic album has shown me is that I have so much more to look forward to in the world of long players. This is a dynamite record. When coming to the mark, you know, this is a very high-scoring album. Dark Side of the Moon and Dare are 100% marks, correct? We have two that are 100. So I think this is probably our second highest rating for an album. It doesn't make 100%, not quite. But for Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers, the final mark, 98%.